Thank you for joining us for the third quarter 2023 LP update for REFASHIOND Seed, the rolling fund on Angel List. We have a somewhat hectic agenda today. We'll do a quick update of the thesis. We will go through updates on the portfolio. We will discuss performance since we launched the fund in July of 2021. Talk a little bit about fundraising, which has been difficult this year. As usual, we'll talk about the macro environment. We'll do a bit of an update on the strategy, and then we will have an open session for Q&A. And if it's necessary, we might go through some of the items in the appendix. Very quickly, this should be familiar to most of you on the call. REFASHIOND Ventures, we're an industrial transformation fund investing in early stage startups, refashioning legacy industries. We're focused on data and AI, advanced materials, advanced manufacturing, and next generation supply chains. This is a slight update from 2 quarters ago, and I'll get into why we've made the updates later on. As you know, the way that we think about the opportunity is slightly different from some of our peers. Our argument is that because of the climate crisis, the global economy is due for an upgrade, a significant upgrade. And you can't mitigate the climate crisis unless you transform industrial value chains. And you can't transform industrial value chains unless you refashion supply chains. So in our minds, this is the biggest investment opportunity that exists. And it's even more interesting because it's the sort of opportunity that is going to last for many decades. We now have 38 first check investments in the portfolio, 42 in total. Last quarter, we made 3 new investments. The first one is Valis Insights. Valis Insights is a data and AI in the metal recycling business. They develop software for the recycling markets. The products enable metals recyclers to maximize product output and to automate the processes by which they run their businesses. The company is a great mix of people who understand the recycling business and people who understand software technology. And interestingly, they had raised a significant amount of non-dilutive capital from government sources before they raised this seed round.
Millions.
Yes, millions of dollars. Our rationale for making the investment is a simple one. A lot of metals are sourced from parts of the world that are politically and socially unstable. And that is becoming a problem, especially if you lay on top of that some of the geopolitical tensions that are increasing. And if you also lay on top of that some of the sustainability, environmental, and climate issues that are coming to the fore. And so what's happening is there's great interest in sourcing raw materials domestically, if that's possible. And some of these raw materials are trapped in metals that can be recycled. And so because of that interest, we believe that a company like Valis has a big opportunity ahead of it. The second startup we invested in Q3 is Ceres Technologies. Ceres enables companies to optimize their logistics network by finding patterns and trends within internal and external data sources to predict upstream disruptions months in advance of those disruptions taking place. Interestingly, the founders of Ceres originally set out to build a coffee company. And as they were building the company, they run into the problems of disruptions in their supply chain from their upstream suppliers. As they investigated that problem, they realized, wait, maybe this is a problem that we can solve. And so they started to build a technology to solve it for themselves. As they made progress building that technology, they realized that other companies had the same sorts of problems and needed what they had built. And so they decided to pivot from building a coffee business to building a technology a company. Could you please mute yourself if you're not on mute? And so they made a pivot from building a coffee company to building a technology company. Fortunately, they have the skill set to enable them to build Ceres technology. And so it was an easy pivot for them. It was an easy pivot for them to make. We don't state it here, but already at the point at which they raised their pre-seed round, they were beating a number of large management consulting firms and bigger competitors to win business from customers. The third company that we invested in is an interesting story because the company we invested in, the business we invested in no longer exists. And instead, we're now investors in a different business. So originally, when we made the investment, the idea Fawad had was to build Freightlend, which would be a financing platform for accounts receivables in the container shipping industry. That's an industry he knows well. He's worked in it for some years. And so we were making a bet on him. While he was exploring that business, and based on the time he spent at Amazon, he uncovered a different opportunity, which was that in international e-commerce, there's a huge problem in product classification and listings. And given the advancements in generative AI, he teamed up with a technologist. And now the business that they're building is to help companies in international e-commerce solve that problem in a scalable way. The way that problem is solved now is very manual. And the problem is that if you're selling, let's say you're selling headphones, you're selling them in the US, in Taiwan, and in the UK. Those are three different listings which require three different sets of regulations for you to comply with. That is a process that takes a lot of time and is somewhat expensive. And so using software, they're going to automate that. They already have a pilot with a very large international e-commerce player. And we think that the speed with which they secured that pilot, because the technology is not built yet. They literally described what they were going to build to the company, and the company said, if you can build it, we will become your pilot customer. And so we think the speed with which they secured that pilot is indicative that there's significant demand in that market. This is a huge opportunity. According to UN sources, e-commerce in 2017 amounted to about $29 trillion of revenues. And that number is increasing year over year. So we think this might actually be a better opportunity than the original business that we invested in. Lisa, do you want to talk about data?
Sure. Our fabulous back end. This is data pulled directly from our Airtable. For those of you that aren't aware, we have a robust Airtable database that has both granular structured and unstructured data to allow us to have better informed insights across our, across our portfolio, looking forward and backwards so that we can make better informed decisions on future investments. And the tags that you're seeing on the right are tags across all of the companies that have submitted into our database. Actually, interestingly enough, just had a call with a huge corporate who asked for a screenshot of this so that they could see just which tags are relevant to them. to look at more of our portfolio companies and companies in our pipeline. Primary categories, of course, data is everything is a data business. So data is over-indexed because it represents basically every company. But we do, you can see how everything is breaking down. We're looking to beef up our advanced manufacturing and advanced materials investments, especially as we can move into next year, hopefully taking bigger chunks through larger checks with our institutional fund. Those companies, we believe, are foundational for mitigating climate crisis. We cannot SaaS our way into a sustainable planet. And so we're excited about going deeper in those areas. Next slide. Diversity. Yes, we believe diversity will yield better returns. Of our total investments to date, we're trying to, not intentionally aiming for, but we're glad to see that we are almost balanced with male CEOs and female CEOs. We have done 4 reinvestments so far, and the ethnic breakdown of our portfolio is abundantly diverse. You can see the whiter Caucasian is 36.4% of our current portfolio.
Before we move off this slide, this is something we got a lot of heat for when we were first launching the fund and talking to prospective LPs. They asked us why we didn't have why diversity and inclusion was not part of our thesis. And the argument I made was I spent 4 years responsible for doing research on diversity and inclusion at UBS and at Lehman. And the conclusion I reached was operations and supply chain, or what most people call the back office, is the most diverse part of corporate America. And since our thesis is about transforming that part of the corporate world, we expect that the founders we meet will be inherently more diverse than if we were investing in marketing tech or ad tech or fintech or some of those other areas. And so we're very happy that the data is bearing out. We're constructing our portfolio. So philosophically, our aim is to reduce the number of investments that go completely to zero and to maximize the number of investments that yield a 10x or greater return. What that means is the way we spend our time is somewhat different than perhaps how other fund managers would spend their time. And the way we're building the firm is also somewhat different. So some of you will remember that we do 2 other things in addition to managing the fund. One is we've been building a global community, the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation, which is a network of supply chain meetups, with New York being the flagship chapter. And the other is REFASHIONed OS, which provides hands-on scaling infrastructure for startups in the portfolio. The way to think about the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation is that through that grassroots community, we are optimizing for our founders' ability to learn the things that they do not know in an informal way. What does that mean? We realized before we started building the fund that often when technologists start to build a product for supply chain or for industrial transformation, they understand the technology, but they don't necessarily understand the industry. They don't necessarily understand the customer base, how the customers think, and that sort of thing. And so the impetus for the community was let's create an informal environment in which these founders can talk to executives, can talk to professionals in the industries that they're targeting, and learn what these potential customers expect. And over time, that will enable them become more effective at what they've set out to do. What ROS does is more deliberate. So while the Federation optimizes for learning, ROS is optimizing for the ability of startups in our portfolio to actually generate revenue. So what that means is helping them with initiating customer conversations, helping them with scaling those customer conversations beyond an initial pilot. It's not required, right? So a startup in the portfolio does not have to work with ROS, but if they want to, that's something that is that's an option. And Lisa, if you want to talk a little bit about some of what you've done with ROS.
To put a bow on it, ROS gives us our 7 additional team members that aren't on the fund's dime for operating budget to support our portfolio companies. And they specifically exist to create opportunities that these companies otherwise wouldn't have and have to sing for their supper. So they only make money if they're driving revenue. It really, so far this year, we've applied for a couple of grants with our portfolio companies. I just completed a submission for the Advanced Robotics Manufacturing Institute Modernization Challenge with 2 of our portfolio companies, which would give them access to $500K in grants to do a deployment. That would give them direct visibility into the DoD and have a deployment across one of the key partners of ARM Institute. So things like that, where they otherwise wouldn't have access, insight, time, resources on their own. We roll up our sleeves, and I spent my Thanksgiving break working on supporting them in drafting that 5-page application.
Yeah. So in terms of how we hope or what we expect the returns to look like, and before I go into this conversation, I should emphasize that these are hypothetical scenarios. Actual returns may differ from this considerably, but the assumption we go in with initially is that 50% of the portfolio will go to zero. At least 50% of the portfolio will go to zero. This is in keeping with expected trends for pre-seed and seed stage technology startups in general. And then the scenarios I've highlighted, 1, 5, and 6, present different cases in which, if those scenarios were to be true and to play out, then we would do quite well. We would meet expectations, right? The net IRR would be somewhere in the range of 20%, which would probably make us a top quartile fund. Scenarios number 3 and number 4 would not be the end of the world, but they wouldn't be great. And scenarios number 9 and number 10 and even number 8 would be amazing. So this is how we think about the scenarios that could unfold. Like I said, our focus is minimize the number of startups that go completely to zero. So while we're assuming 50%, we're working very hard to make sure that less than 50% go to zero. And then where we feel a startup could return the fund or better, our plan is to stay out of the way and allow them to do what they're doing. Fundraising this year has been hard, but it hasn't been completely unfruitful. We now have committed capital in the fund of about $2.5 million. As I said at the start of the presentation, we've made 42 investments overall since July of 2021. That is across 38 unique startups. We closed 3 investments in Q3, and all those 3 investments were brand new. The slowdown in fundraising has affected funds and startups as well. And so it's been more difficult for startups in the portfolio to close the rounds that they were raising. The advice we've given to them is stop focusing so much on fundraising.
Sell.
Yeah, sell to customers. Make your customers happy, get them to use your product more than they've done in the past. And it's difficult to say. Prognosticators think next year will be better. I don't know. I can't predict what next year is going to look like. But hopefully because it's an election year, the government and the Fed loosen strings a little bit, and perhaps that plays out in the venture ecosystem too.
I want to say something about selling. So we've made sure that our portfolio companies are aware, if you're selling into the same customers, you should be talking to each other. And so just through one aha moment, light bulbs going off, 2 of our portfolio companies immediately had a meeting and sent me a photo of them meeting, and then followed up and said, we're closing a contract because of that one meeting on new business. So our portfolio companies also, we believe, have an unfair advantage to collaborate and share resources, intelligence, contacts, and biz dev, where 1 + 1 basically equals a greater sum. We can't say a specific amount, but it's greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. Yeah, and for the rolling fund, we're always looking for new LPs. This summarizes some of what I've said before. So committed capital in the fund is about $2.5 million. Paid in capital is about $2 million. That's roughly 79% of the committed capital. And we've deployed roughly 50% or so of the committed capital. As far as the institutional fund goes, we can't say much. We're fundraising. The structure is going to be the traditional structure. It's not going to be a rolling fund. Same thesis, same investment strategy, same investments, same team.
Bigger checks, bigger bite and ownership.
Yes. Every startup in our portfolio has wished that we could represent a bigger portion of their cap table. We're hoping to do a first close in Q1. And if you can help with introductions to family offices, institutional investors, or corporations, that would be very, very welcome. Now we'll spend some time on the macro environment. The details vary a bit, but the big picture variables have not really changed. Geopolitical tensions, climate change and severe weather, and people now expect companies to do better and are demanding that the leaders, politicians, do something about what's happening. And we've explored these themes at length in previous updates. Far be it from me to question the SEC chairman's remarks. Here, he's saying that the largest US companies should tell shareholders their risks from a potential US-China split. I think a scenario in which the US and China decouple completely is unlikely. That said, if war were to break out between the US and China, obviously, there would be a complete decoupling of supply chains between the two countries. So I see where he's going. I just don't have enough information to say if it's realistic to expect a complete split between the US and China. But obviously, if you're CEO of a huge company, I think these are scenarios that the executive teams should be thinking about.
I'll speak a little bit to that as well through ROS, because we offer services to a number of companies. We've had a number of companies reach out to us that specifically want to get out of China yesterday and are looking to localize all of their production.
Yeah. Lisa, I know you want to talk about this.
Oh, yeah, new paradigms. So for those of you that aren't aware why we're called Refashioned, basically this speaks to it. We believe that the time is long past for us to invest in incremental solutions or band-aids, which most people have been trying to band-aid our way into a sustainable planet. We believe that we need new paradigms, and we need to entirely refashion the way that we are producing, moving, consuming
Storing,
things.
consuming.
Yeah. And so this article speaks to that. Basically, there is an entirely new paradigm. It's no longer linear. You no longer really have a supply chain. It's more of a constant infinity symbol loop, where I like to say it's like you're playing a game of Monopoly or pick your board game, and your kid's sister comes along every 5 seconds and flips the board. So you have to start over, reset, assess the damage, and try to have some semblance of stability or a playing field. So that is the new normal. And the systems that are going to support this constant state of flux look entirely different than the systems that have existed in the past.
There's a technical term for what Lisa just described. It's called VUCA. The world is more volatile, more uncertain, more complex, and more ambiguous.
You don't like my Monopoly flipping the board scenario? I thought it was... All right, next slide, Brian. Take your VUCA and get out of here.
So this ad from Apple caught us completely by surprise. Although it was nice to see such a big, visible company essentially describing our investment thesis. And we can't say which company, but one of the companies in our portfolio was featured in the ad. Lisa, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Well, I think it's interesting that, of course, they were hailed for this ad at first, but there's always a flip side. They've also had a massive backlash of like, well, how sustainable is it really? And, you know, we have to support companies that are trying to refashion their value chains. They're not going to be perfect out of the gate, but at least they're trying. And I thought it was a great representation, especially from such a well-loved and sort of cult-like following for this company. Hopefully they can convert people and help the world to understand the importance of the scale of change that needs to be undertaken.
And I think that's an important point. None of this is easy. None of this is easy. It's very, very, very hard. And so I think when companies are trying to do the right thing, it's important that we support them. And obviously, we hope that they will buy many of the companies in our portfolio. So this is interesting because, again, when we initially started talking about our thesis with prospective LPs, some LPs said to us, why don't you describe yourselves as an impact fund? Why don't you describe yourselves as an ESG fund? Why don't you describe yourselves as a sustainability fund? And it got on my nerves so much that I actually had to sit down one day and write a blog post about it. But I think what companies are realizing as the backlash to ESG increases is that really what they are doing, what they hope to accomplish, is going to play out through changes in their supply chains. If ESG is your thing, all those goals are going to be accomplished through some fundamental change in the supply chain. If impact is the goal, those objectives will only happen through changes in the supply chain. If sustainability is the goal, it's going to be through transformations in the supply chain. So that's what
I
this
think what this article is referring to is that the industry is being called out more on ESG and impact having nebulous goals.
Yes.
And if you can't really you can't have targets if you're not even aware of what to measure or
yes.
having standards on how to measure it. So it's become the boogeyman because it's kind of based on a house of cards. We really need, if we're going to get serious about this, it's not going to be one or two investments that are going to make you sustainable or compliant with ESG.
Yeah. Okay, Lisa.
Ah, Shein.
I'm going to step out of the way.
Go get a snack, Brian. So Shein is gearing up for an IPO in the US, which I think is bonkers, especially considering that nobody really knows who the CEO is. I mean, can we have a company IPO if nobody even knows who the CEO is? This is a Chinese company that is the #1 fast fashion retailer. They have reached, multi-billions in annual revenue, primarily by selling into the US market. The problems is that they're producing millions of unique designs every year compared to the average brand's couple of thousand. And they have no regulation or compliance around their production standards. There have been exposés of reporters going in and looking at their facilities and finding child and forced labor and workforces that really are being exploited. So they get around this and all of the customs and standards that would intercept these sorts of shipments by having such low price points. You can't possibly hit the $800 threshold for them to actually be intercepted by customs. So there's all kinds of, this is going to be fraught with all kinds of pushback, and thankfully a good amount of Congress people are up in arms about this and are trying to find ways to make it really hard for them to IPO by actually forcing them to disclose details around their supply chain.
Yeah, I have a feeling there's going to be a CFIUS investigation on Shein.
Yeah, they've found a way to get around. They wanted to build in U.S. soil, and some local Congress people pushed back and basically ran them out of their towns. So their way to get around that was by partnering with Forever 21. And so they're getting physical infrastructure through their partner Forever 21 on U.S. soil before their IPO.
Okay. China and the United States are jockeying for positions in the rare metals supply chain. And this article specifically focuses on ultra pure quartz. The United States is the predominant producer. A company in North Carolina is the predominant producer. And this article focuses on the steps that China is taking to develop its own domestic ultra pure quartz industry. This article basically says what we've been saying, which is that the DNA of supply chains that will succeed in the future requires a lot of new innovations, some of which are in the very nascent stages of development. And this, again, going back to the topic of rare metals, the United States for a long time, there's been a concern about how the United States would gain access to lithium, which is essential for the transition to renewable energy sources, and especially for EVs. But this new discovery in Nevada, if the findings prove to be accurate, could change the balance of influence in the global lithium market.
But this also further underscores the need for us to invest in circularity.
Yeah.
We have tons of these raw materials sitting in landfills and people's closets and junk drawers. We need to find ways to reuse existing assets.
Yeah. With COP28 starting this weekend, I think it's already started. I haven't been listening to the news much these days, but this comment by the UN Secretary General is noteworthy because he essentially says we've opened the gates of hell by letting the climate crisis get worse. And recent reports on that topic suggest, for example, something I read just before the call started said 2023 has been the hottest year to date, and 2024 is shaping up to be hotter than 2023. Lisa, this is all you.
Yeah. So through ROS, we've been doing a lot of work applying for EDA recompete grants and looking at how the government is looking to deploy capital across the country to invest in key initiatives for the Biden administration infrastructure programs. And I thought it was interesting reading through this article. When it breaks down to it, there was a piece of article that said something like each region will get between 350 and 670 something $1,000. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, what are they going to do with that? Buy a coffee maker for their facilities? What's needed is millions, tens of millions for key infrastructure, especially around recycling. Recycling is not enough. If we're going to be investing in infrastructure, it really should be moving us forward to circularity. So 100 million seems like a good amount, but people need to be the government and the decision makers that are deploying this capital and deciding how it's used need to be thinking about the systemic end result that we're trying to target. It seems like people have forgotten that you can actually apply systems thinking and design to achieve the outcomes you're looking to achieve rather than trying to apply band-aids to broken systems. Made in the USA, one of my favorite topics. So this also speaks to the White House really supporting workforce development efforts and advanced manufacturing jobs. ROS applied for a EDA recompete grant to work on a large initiative with a key partner that hopefully we can announce maybe in the next quarterly update. EDA Tech Hubs. So part of the overall EDA deployments for infrastructure development, there's two key initiatives. Tech Hubs, which identified 31 key hubs across America. And then there's Recompete, which is about creating workforce development in distressed regions. So Tech Hubs, we now have 31, woohoo. Check out who they are and where they're located. They're primarily focused on chips and processors and heavy machinery, things like that. I think that we, again, should be looking at all the key things to keep American citizens safe and secure first and foremost. And I was actually saddened to see that there wasn't as much of that emphasized in where they deployed awards. Again, made in the USA. We put this in here because made in the USA is been my mantra for the past 10 years. And we actually do have a ton of manufacturing that has somehow managed to exist, even though we had the great offshoring. We've now got this great reshoring and government support for needed infrastructure and upgrades. So if you're curious, you can, when we send this out, there's a link. You can check out more details on the top 10 US manufacturing states.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. So the thesis update, some feedback we got was that to many people, supply chain is still an enigma. And they hear the words supply and chain together and they get shivers. They just don't admit it. And so in thinking about ways to make our investment thesis more approachable, we went back to the drawing board. We said, well, what we're really talking about is industrial transformation. And our argument is that industrial transformation can't happen without the refashioning of supply chains. And so what we're doing now is talking about those two issues in tandem with one another. And we're hoping that makes it easier for prospective co-investors, for potential limited partners, for startup founders and corporate partners to engage with us. That's it. So we'll open the floor for Q&A. One thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about performance, because of the way rolling funds are structured, as I say in every written quarterly update that we send, please refer to your angel list investor dashboard. That will have the most relevant performance data and metrics for the quarters over which you subscribed. And I think we've set it up so that every LP in the rolling fund can see the startups that are part of their portfolio. On that note, I will open the floor for questions.
Don't be shy.
So folks, I have a question, both, as a founder and an LP. So you chatted a little bit about fundraising challenges or macro environment. Do you have any insight from your portfolio companies around the buying environment, the software vendor relationship environment, in terms of good, bad feedback? And I'm happy to share my own insights from my direct, but I'd love to hear if you guys have a purview over the handful of companies that are in the portfolio.
I would be lying if I said we did.
Okay.
I think I would be lying if I said we did. My instinct is that it is probably more challenging than at other times. Mm-hmm. And that's merely, sentiment. Mm-hmm. Everyone's feeling a little less sure, a little less certain, and unless we absolutely have to make a change, let's stick with what we already have, that kind of thing.
I will counter Brian's point by saying, I think it depends on your approach. I think there are ways you can get really smart and strategic about, shooting fish in a barrel instead of trying to fish in the ocean. Mm-hmm. And, definitely reach out to us and maybe we can strategize on who else in our portfolio companies should be collaborating with you and other portfolio companies, because there's a massive network there. Also, I think it's about finding the right communities and organizations to be part of.
If it's helpful, I can kind of share my thoughts from the road.
Yeah. Please.
So I'll tell you, kind of prior to founding Perspective as a salesperson, that I use that as a little bit of a baseline. The last 6 to 8 months was kind of the first time over the last, call it 5 to 7 years, that I've explicitly heard from more than one person, both Fortune 100 as well as kind of mid-market and small and medium businesses, around budgets actually being cut. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you, meaning software spend, net new mm-hmm. software spend. Mm-hmm. So that was a different theme that I had not heard, frankly, over the last, multiple mm-hmm. years. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you, the counter to that is, while I don't ever want to compete on price, and cost save should always mm-hmm. be an and value add as opposed to the
Mhm.
primary.
Mhm.
The direct feedback I've gotten from Fortune 100, as well as kind of up and down the chain around size of company, in and out of, supply chain data around it, is being able to prove out either explicit takeout or reduction in cost of a different vendor or competing vendor, and additional revenue opportunity,
Yeah.
value add, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I say it in the context of it's not that deals aren't getting done, but the scrutiny that any buyer, be it a business, CEO of a business unit or head of X type of business unit, look, just anecdotally, I'll like count on my one hand, but folks have been like, Eric, there's not net new spend, but if you can prove out we can transition the dollar spend from one bucket to another, and you can prove out some level of efficiency in terms of time saved or the additional revenue, customer satisfaction, those type of things, it's still there. And I say that just in contrast to the prior, call it 2, 3, 5 years of selling enterprise stuff. It's only been the last 6 to 8 months that I've actually I've had a buyer tell me that. So
it's interesting because yesterday I had a call with a chief supply chain officer of a huge Fortune 100 company, and she was saying that they were impressed with our portfolio because they're not incremental. They're looking for paradigm shifting, and they're very excited in leaning into things that are not just going to move the needle a little, it's going to take them where they need to go.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Other questions? Thank you, Eric.
Hey guys, Arun here.
Hi, Arun.
Hi there.
Hi. Well, one comment. I do have a couple of folks I'd like to introduce you to via email. One sort of interesting company that does freight intelligence, and maybe a few potential LP.
We'll take it.
Thank you.
I don't know how to exactly articulate this, but I really appreciate the macro perspective, but a couple themes I sort of took away here, where China can be bad, in terms of practices on sort of ESG related sort of concerns, and government has a big role to play in shaping positive outcomes. I spent a lot of time dealing with the governments, and the thing that to me kind of intersects this idea where it's really hard to change big government behavior in terms of where funding gets allocated. But I think the place that ties both these things in a net benefit way is the Department of Defense, right? Because when it comes to discretionary budgets, DoD gets the lion's share, right? And you don't need to convince anyone in DoD that China's a threat, and we need to do things to counter that. And I'm just wondering, I think it would be I don't know, I'm just wondering, is there a way to sort of shape sort of grassroots with your startup portfolio to kind of go target the DoD as the sort of catalyst to kind of force the sort of behavior change? And I just really think, to me, that's the way to actually sort of action sort of where the road meets the road.
That's a really astute point, and it's the reason I became an ARM Institute member and actually attended their annual member meeting. And I think it is a huge component for how we can piece together our portfolio companies to address a lot of the systemic needs that they're looking for. In fact, I had a great conversation with a number of the ARM Institute executives while I was down there, but there is a lot of work that ROS is doing to help facilitate that DoD collaboration.
The constraints is, one, the small capital base that we're working with right? In terms of the fund, the team is really just Lisa and myself. And in addition to running the fund, building the community and ROS, we also have to worry about how we keep the lights on how we keep the bill collectors at bay until things turn around. So that's a bit of the constraint. But Arun, you're absolutely right. In a perfect world where we had all the resources, there would be someone on the team who would have a primary responsibility of building a strong relationship with the DoD and maybe some other departments in the government.
Yeah, and besides that ARM Institute event, I also went to the DoD Advanced Manufacturing Momentum Conference earlier this year as well.
Yeah.
And that's where, again, I was the only VC and they were like, what are you doing here? I stood up and spoke after each session and everyone was like, you have the solutions we're looking for. I think there's a massive opportunity to bridge that gap between what they think is so far out in the future and what's actually being built that we have in our portfolio ready for them to access. So if you'd like to collaborate on that, I'd love to follow up with you, Arun.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of, so I guess where I'm going with this, and sorry, I don't need me to monopolize all the airtime on, it just sort of, it's kind of hard to kind of advocate for startups one at a time for these big things, but I like this sort of ROS sort of concept of like in aggregate, like, think about, doing this. And so, one example that just came to my mind, which made me think about this is, I forget the exact legislation, but the tax code that doesn't allow software companies to like depreciate software development costs. That affects small startups quite a bit, but it also affects big companies like Microsoft and Google. And so there's a lot of advocacy on the Hill to like, get rid of that. And I'm just sort of like wondering, things like what the sort of circular sort of ecosystem versus recycling, right? I think there's a way that you can advocate for issues that affect small companies disproportionately, but are also in the interest of bigger companies, that gets action. And I want to sort of help out here, and I'd love to collaborate. I just but I think it's more about aggregating the insights that you see from across your portfolio and targeting sort of the right stakeholders. And that, when it comes to DoD innovation, I've got a pretty good handle on that. So I can probably get, figure out that lay of the land. But
yeah,
I'd
love to follow up with you and share some of the things that we're doing through ROS and see if there's an opportunity for us to collaborate.
Yeah, because I'm getting a little bit more plugged into supply chain now. I'm seeing a lot of activity, and I also happen to have more free time opening up. So I got, yeah, we'll take that offline. But that just cut some stuff that started in my head while listening to the presentation.
I love sharing all the stuff one-on-one because we can't disclose publicly because ROS is a separate company. But yeah, we're doing we're swinging for the fences because somebody has to.
Cool.
Thank you, Arun.
Yeah.
Other questions? Anyone else have other questions or comments, observations?
Or kudos, you could just tell us we're awesome too.
That always makes me suspicious.
Or that we suck. I mean, we're open to both.
Eric, I'm disappointed. I thought you would be texting me after my 64-mile walk. Nothing.
But I care. You need to do a marathon, do more. I expect more. What do you want? You want me to hit the like button on your Facebook post? All right, I'll hit the like button on your Facebook post.
He's so thirsty, right?
Yeah, you got to stay hydrated. And you walk.
No, I mean, he's so thirsty for compliments.
Yeah, he absolutely is. He loves the attention, man.
Yes.
No, dude, super well done. Just a little backstory. Brian and I met a long time ago, and it was something about walking and running and things like that. So I appreciate it because I haven't run that distance in a long time. So it's good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, if that's everyone's
there are-
ready to.
Yeah, if there are no other questions or comments or complaints, we will bring the third quarter 2023 LP update to a close, and keep an eye out for an email probably early next week with the link to the video, a link to the presentation, and links to some, if not all, of our past quarterly updates for those who want to check those out. On that note, have a great weekend. And once again, thank you for joining us for this update.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.